Chapter 5. Eji's days settled into a soothing pattern. He soon discovered that deliveries encompassed all the little tasks that were required to keep the humans of the ship fed. Peeling, chopping, and washing were all done under the watchful eye of some more experienced kitchen worker, but Eji was at least trusted to scrub vast pots and endless piles of plates without supervision. So far, the man most often set to watch him was Rokuro, the one who had teased Lord Felix so brazenly on Eji's first day. Eji found him rather trying, though Rokuro obviously did his best to be friendly and make him feel welcome. He was loud and boisterous, as many of the kitchen workers seemed to be. Eji wondered sometimes whether the kitchens attracted men who were unsuited to the silence and submission required of a personal attendant. What did that say about him, he wondered. 5 days after Eji's claiming, however, he found the kitchen staff unusually subdued when he arrived to help with breakfast preparations. They were all working in grim silence when he entered. Norio and Rokuro called out a greeting, but it lacked their usual cheery bounce. "Hey, Eji, help me out over here," Rokuro called. When Eji joined him, the older man gestured to an enormous pile of loaves of bread. He had a much smaller pile of thick slices already cut, and he handed Eji the knife. "The gods are going ashore tonight," Rokuro said, without any further greeting. "They'll be putting down some Surgish raiders." Oh, that explained the tense atmosphere. There hadn't been many battles during Eji's time with Lord Antony, 3 or 4 a year at most, but there had been enough for Eji to learn to fear them. They usually happened at sea after the gods caught sight of one of the monsters, but whether they happened on land or sea, the protocol was the same. One of the gods barricaded all of the general service offerings in the barracks along with any personal attendants whose masters ordered them there, and the rest of the personal attendants bolted their masters' doors and waited, no matter what sounds they heard coming from above deck. When the gods came back, they were always wild and strange. Lord Antony had never laid a hand on Eji on those nights, but some of his friends in general service had terrifying stories of gods hammering at the barrack doors and demanding entry. "It's Lord Felix's turn to join the battle this time, isn't it?" Rokuro asked. Eji was confused. "His turn?" "Yes." Rokuro waved a loaf of bread in his direction. "Lord Theodora went last time, so this time she'll guard the barracks. The two of them alternate." Eji supposed he had heard that at some point, but Lord Felix hadn't been important to him at the time. He hadn't paid particular attention. He worked through supper, then hurried back to his master's rooms. Lord Felix was usually there by this point in the evening, though he was often gone by the time Eji woke in the mornings. The god seemed to keep a strangely human schedule, absenting himself from his rooms for much of the day. On the days Eji had served breakfast and lunch, he had had several hours to himself before the god returned from whatever pursuits and duties occupied his time. Eji still had very little idea what those might be. Whenever he greeted his master, he was immediately plied with question after question about his own day and activities. It was baffling. Eji could only hope that their more formalized interaction on the first morning of the week would allow him to actually use his conversational graces. So far, Lord Felix evaded all his well-trained efforts to return the focus of the conversation to where it belonged. Their exchange the afternoon before had been typical. "Hello, Eji. You may raise your head. What did Zenji have you toiling over today?" "I chopped vegetables most of the day, my lord. Master Zenji sends his respects." "Oh, yes? What are your favorite vegetables?" "I'm fond of carrots, my lord. Do you wish to do me the honor of feeding from me?" "Maybe later. Why carrots? Excuse my prying, but since I can't eat your foods, I'm curious about them." "My lord is free to ask as he pleases. I suppose I enjoy the crunch, my lord, and the variation. One carrot can be quite sweet and the next bitter. It's interesting." "I might have known. You don't seem to prefer that things be easy or predictable. Is your hand sore from wielding the knife?" "I am well, my lord. Thank you for your concern. Is there any way I may be of service?" "You can answer this. Speaking of soreness, did you need a new mattress? More pillows?" "Your servant is well and grateful for my lord's gracious concern." And on it went. He supposed that today there would be no questions about carrots. He would be receiving his orders for the night. If he'd had any doubts whether his master was participating in the night's raid, they were dispersed when he opened the door and found Lord Felix wearing armor. It was light and sleek, but unmistakable. Equally distinctive were the long knives at his hips and the sword at his back. Eiji had only belonged to Lord Felix for a few days, but he realized suddenly that he had relaxed far too much. He had thought only of the sweet smiles and gentle words and attention, all swathed in plain clothes and quiet tones. He had never forgotten that Lord Felix was a god, but now Eiji remembered that he was a war god. He dropped down at his master's feet with his heart in his throat. He wasn't a small man, but he was suddenly aware of how much larger than him Lord Felix was. He didn't dress or move in ways that highlighted his size, but it was there all the same. "Hello, Eiji." The god's voice was soft as ever, but less cheerful than usual. "How was your day?" "I am well, my lord, thank you." Eiji was too overwhelmed with sudden nervousness to return the question, as he knew he should. "We should talk about tonight." As always, Lord Felix seemed bizarrely aware of his feelings. Eiji relaxed infantasmally and realized he'd been clenching his fingers against the carpet. He hadn't quite fisted his hands, but it was still a flaw in the position he'd practiced since he could walk. Inexcusable! "Lift your head, please." Maybe his slip hadn't been noticed. Eiji pushed himself up to his knees and found that this put Lord Felix's knives at his eye level. He dropped his gaze to the god's feet. "May I touch you?" He had heard that request every day since Lord Felix claimed him. It always flooded him with a heady mix of excitement and discomfort as he fumbled for an appropriate response. Of course he wanted the god to touch him, but why did he always ask? It put Eiji in the uncomfortable position of giving Lord Felix permission to use his own things. It never led to more than a stroke of his hair or an adjustment of the collar of his robes. Still, he always felt half frozen with pleasure as he felt those chilly fingers on him. Couldn't Lord Felix, who seemed to have a map of Eji's every thought and feeling after less than a week of his company, tell that he welcomed his master's touch? "I am yours, my lord," he whispered now. "If it pleases you to grace me with your touch, I will receive it gladly." Gentle fingers tilted his chin up until he was looking at the god in the face. Eiji felt his pulse spike and his brain slow as those dark eyes softened in a smile. "Thank you," Lord Felix said. He didn't remove his hand. "Now, I expect you know already that we get a little strange after a fight, so you'll understand why I don't want you to be in our shared spaces when I return. Would you prefer to stay in your room or join the others in the barracks?" Eiji was usually left bewildered by the choices Lord Felix gave him. It was hard to work out the right answer, and even now he wasn't sure whether his master's placid acceptance of all his decisions over the last few days meant that he had managed to choose correctly every time, or that Lord Felix was simply good at hiding his annoyance. This decision, however, was easy. "May I stay here, my lord?" he asked. An attendant belonged at his master's side, ready to serve at the slightest notice. It would be unacceptable to voluntarily put himself out of Lord Felix's reach. "Of course." Lord Felix's smile didn't falter, but his voice sounded a little troubled. Had Eiji finally given the wrong answer? He wanted to press himself back to the floor and begin pleading for forgiveness, but the god's hand was still holding his chin in place. His grip didn't grow any firmer, but his face and voice did as he kept speaking. "I'm going to give you an order now. I will try to enter quietly, but if I wake you, do not come out. Not even if I call for you. I don't plan on it, of course, but I want you to know that I will not pass your curtain without permission, no matter how addled I get, and that if I do behave like an idiot and call out to you, you will not be punished for disobeying. Stay in your room. Understood?" "Yes, my lord." As soon as the words were out of his mouth, Eiji knew he'd spoken too fervently. Lord Felix's eyes widened and he pulled his hand back. It was probably for the best, though Eiji mourned the loss. He'd been altogether too close to losing his battle against nuzzling into those chilly fingers. Receiving those orders in such a stern, commanding tone felt like being fed from. It felt like security and acceptance, like Lord Felix was finally behaving like his master instead of a temple bunkmate. Eiji could have kissed the departing fingers in pleasure and gratitude. "All right," Lord Felix nodded. "If that's settled, I'm going to go. Marcus and I will need to get the last few organization details worked out. I hope you have a good evening and sleep well, Eiji." The god had been delaying his departure in order to wait for him to get back, Eiji realized. His sense of well-being dissipated as quickly as it had arisen. He wanted so desperately to be good for Lord Felix. He wanted to bring him pleasure and convenience. It was what he was for. But he had no way to prevent his master from inconveniencing himself on Eiji's behalf. Everything Eiji needed to be could be undone without his even having a choice in the matter. And of course, that was the god's prerogative if he so chose, but it felt so... That was blasphemy, of course. He had no more right to protest how Lord Felix chose to use him than did the god's shoes. His only responsibility was to be better and render such inconveniences impossible. Still, he stayed on his knees long after the door shut behind his master, wrestling down wave after wave of despair.